Hey, it's Pat Oancia, and I'm the founder and co-developer of the BaseWorks method. So the BaseWorks method is an approach that focuses on the cognitive and perceptual aspects of physical movement. The BaseWorks transmission conversations explore both concrete and abstract realizations that emerge out of the commitment to any kind of practice or pursuit to achieve life goals. And our aim with these productions is to find a common vocabulary to help better describe these experiences.
In this episode, I sat down with Edward Clark, a writer, teacher, and director of Trip Sikri Yoga Theatre. Our connection goes back to 2007 when we met in Indonesia, and what struck me then and still does was his teaching style. His approach was uncompromising and put yoga under a critical lens in ways which I felt very important for people to experience. That connection brought him to collaborate with us in Tokyo multiple times over the years, where he'd teach, perform, and sit down with groups to explicitly unpack philosophy and practice in ways that challenge people's beliefs. We trace his path from Canada to the UK in the late 70s through physical theatre and dance to his personal discovery of yoga's untapped choreographic potential. That realization gave birth to Trip Sikri, that's been creating yoga theatre since the early 90s, which you could say is a creative body of work that physicalizes phenomenological landscapes. And what's important here is that this work stands apart from how yoga is typically framed within health and wellness. We get into the reality of funding creative work through teaching, the difference between yoga, asana, and vinyasa from the practical and philosophical standpoints, and why the focus on intensity matters, whether that's in a disciplined practice, punk rock, or athletic training. We also talk about Edward's two books, co-authored by Laurie Green, which bring an academic anthropological lens to how one would teach and practice transnational yoga in contemporary contexts. We chat about performance, ritual, critical thinking, navigating injuries, and questioning what we inherit versus what we create. This gets at what's happening when you refuse to separate art from practice and what it takes to keep doing that. Links and references, as usual, can always be found in the show notes. And if you want to go deeper into any of these podcasts, check out the Companion Reflections episodes. Before we get into this episode, our Montreal study group cohort starts January 24th, 2026 at Circuit Est, where this podcast was actually recorded. The study group combines online coursework and studio sessions that work in synergy. So you study the concepts and then we apply them together in person. For more details and to register, visit baseworks.com/events. So, Edward, thank you very much for making the time on your brief trip to Montreal to be on the transmission conversations.
I'm honored and privileged to be here transmitting.
So,
it's something a lot of celebrity yogis look forward to, and
that's right.
I'm often questioned why I haven't been on it earlier.
Well, I mean, there's always a first time for everything, and we've had many conversations in the past, which I'd like to sort of rehash a little bit on for the time being. We met, I believe it was in Indonesia in 2007, and we were both at that point teaching yoga on a teacher training program in Bali.
You had the reputation as being rather severe.
I would have to say the same thing about you, actually. And not only was the reputation there, but my observations of the way you taught was actually very mind-blowing. And that's actually what really got me excited to invite you to come to Tokyo and teach, which you did subsequently many times. And as a result of this connection, I really wanted to talk to you not only about yoga, because the transmission podcast is not specifically about yoga. These transmission episodes are all about unpacking the different experiences that one would go through in their life. And one of the reasons I really wanted to have you on was, of course, your experience with yoga is a big factor in that too. But we've had many conversations over the years, and I've observed the things that you've been doing, and where you came into how you came into, for example, practicing and teaching yoga, and how you've used, or how you, alongside of your experience with yoga as both a teacher and a practitioner, developed some interesting creative projects out of that. And I'm anticipating that has been part of the expression. So I kind of like to just, before we get really into that, because that's a very interesting part of your history, you're Canadian originally, but you've been in the UK for, over 40 years, I believe, right? So you've been in London specifically over 40 years. So, where are you from in Canada originally? And
Well, I'm from Calgary.
Calgary.
Calgary. There is a Calgary in the UK too, which is, I've been there as well. Yes, I'm from Cowtown.
And until when were you in Calgary?
I guess I really left in 1977. So up to then, we lived in other places, but mainly in Calgary then. Yeah.
So you say you lived in other places. Was that leaving in 1977? Was that leaving Calgary specifically, or leaving Canada altogether?
Altogether, yeah.
Altogether. So was it
Moved to the
pretty much a
UK.
straight transition to the UK from Calgary, or did you live in other big cities in Canada for a while?
When we were very small, we lived in Toronto for a year.
With your family?
Yes.
Okay.
So, but yeah, I had done a degree at the University of Calgary, my alma mater. I did a degree there, and then in a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and found it was theater and choreography, dancey stuff, but it was a drama degree, and we found the scene. I wanted to be somewhere that I saw as being naively, that I saw as being the place where Western culture sort of disseminates from. So you have this choice really between London or New York as it stood in 77. And New
York would have been a good choice too, I would imagine.
It was just harder to do the green card sorts of things, and whereas it was much easier to do that in the UK. So I went in 77. I went to a drama school in the UK.
So drama school. So the degree in fine arts inspired you to continue with fine arts in the realm of drama.
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, I don't think it inspired me. I was absolutely set on it.
Okay.
Prior to this sounds really good. I think on a transmission, I remember thinking when I was 5 years old, this is what I'm doing. And it's one of those things you go, yeah, that's just always felt very clear to me. This is what I'm doing now seemed very much, this is what I'm doing. And, was putting on performances, doing and not just any performance, like an artistic kind of thing. So in way back in those Calgary days, and I'm sure many children do this, but we used to put on shows, and this was like a family thing. At any family gathering, we were putting together performance material, and it was sort of naive, but I was absolutely clear this is what I was doing. And going to university and doing a degree was, just one way to sort of facilitate that.
The fine arts degree was in Calgary?
Yeah.
And was that specifically in drama and theater? Or?
Yeah.
Okay. And then your decision to go on to, where did you study in the UK?
A place called the Drama Studio, which was a postgraduate program.
And did you immediately dive into sort of production-based, stuff, or were you studying first and then rolled it out, or did both things happen at the same time?
Well, whilst there, as we'd say in London, whilst there, went to. I found the experience of theater at that time to be sort of rather disappointing. That the idea in theater that was prevalent, certainly in what we were learning, was very kitchen sink oriented, and I found this attempt at sort of faux realism to not be very appealing, and I couldn't see things in the UK or anywhere actually being different than that. And I saw a couple of things. I saw Stephen Burkoff in a production that he had devised around the Metamorphosis, the Kafka story. And it was incredibly physical. And I mean, one of the things that I had done in the degree was like sort of a choreography sort of line specialty through it. So I was interested in how physical things could be. And so saw a very physical show that Berkoff had done, and I went, yeah, I need to up my physical skills. This is to make the kind of things I would be liking to make. And it's, I think what I felt at that time, or maybe have concluded since, is that theater is not nearly as good as film or television at conveying faux realism in an utterly believable way, because there is a great deal of stylization in theater, and that playing to its strengths, a very physical kind of theater, allows it to be far more, we'll say poetic, but it becomes image-based and demands more of its audience, that they have to deal with the ambiguity of what they're seeing and come up with interpretive stances, so that the audience in a good physical theater piece has demands made of it that are far more interesting and requires more thinking. I liked the idea of then upping my skills. So
your physicality skills.
So I moved back to Toronto and went to a dance theater school there, and was learning Graham technique and bless Martha. But again, I mean, she dealt with highly narrative pieces, but which were emotionally based, and one of the things that she remarked upon was that her pieces were like emotional landscapes.
And a lot of the movements associated with the training of Martha Graham is very visceral. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but also quite yogic, in that her teacher had done some yoga somewhere along the way. So find in her basic technique there are a number of sort of correspondences. There's a little overlap in the Venn diagram of Graham technique and yoga. So anyway, so I went back to Toronto and studied got good there. And one of the things too that I saw, Lindsay Kemp's company was a mime company, but very, very extravagant kind of crazy stuff. And saw some of the work that they were doing, and then
who's that? Sorry,
Lindsay Kemp. Lindsay Kemp. He's a mime artist, but he not sort of in the I'm making a wall kind of mime. Not so much the Marcel Marceau kind of thing. Whose son Baptiste is a yoga teacher. And then Lindsay Kemp came to Toronto, and again, the material they were doing was just so wildly stimulating and crazy. They had...
that must have been an interesting time.
They all are, though.
They all are, yeah. But I mean, just
what a dull time
talk about
that
Toronto
was.
That way. I mean, like
Well, it was the 1977.
Yeah.
Punk had just hit. I mean, I'd come from, again, this was another thing in the UK. Like, you had this whole punk scene that was really happening, and comparing that to like where theater was at, and it was just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like
I mean, but there was a lot of crossover there, wasn't it? But Malcolm McLaren and all these people were like, there was a big sort of like fusion of stuff going on between the punk rock scene, theater, expressive arts.
If only theater had been more into what the punk rock was doing, I think, and it still is desperately trying to catch up. Same for the dance scene. It's, they haven't really caught up with, I would say, the music scene. But I mean, these things go very quickly. The sort of quantum leaps seem to happen in terms of what is uber cool at the moment. But theaters had a hard time of it, but largely of their own devising.
What do you mean hard time?
They haven't kept up terribly well. They haven't been cutting edge. They haven't been this thing of the thing that is this dissemination of Western culture, I guess is what I was trying to say, that it's not been part of
the narrative.
The things that are pushing paradigm shifting kinds of culture.
Is that because of film, or I mean, is it in part? I mean,
laziness.
Laziness.
Yeah.
Just production. You mean what goes into a production? The amount of resources. What you mean by?
They're difficult. The actual industry has a difficult time doing what it does well, which is, as I say, creating a very poetic and ambiguous sort of thing. They've gone down, a path of, I don't know, that makes it look like film or like TV, and it's when it's more extreme, it's far more exciting. This was the thing that was great about Lindsay Kemp's company. They were doing very extreme work. One piece was called Flowers, and it was based on Jean Genet's sort of stuff. So it was, gender breaking and weird. And then another was Salome.
That's in 70s or 80s?
70s. This would be 78, 79, maybe. Salome, and they had just eccentric casts. The incredible Orlando, who was blind, and he was doing, this hugely physical thing in this Salome. Anton Dolan was part of the cast, and he was like in his 80s, and he was playing Herod. It was, and it was so physical, and it was just stunning to watch, and it was this deep, very something that was fun to experience in the same way that being in a mosh pit maybe was fun to experience. You actually had a more visceral experience, and so this accorded well with what I saw as being, what I was wanting to do with theater,
So I mean, let's go. So you're in Toronto. You've come back. How long did you spend back in Canada? Always like timeline.
Moved back. So that was 79. Moved back permanently to London in 1984.
Okay, so back for a few years, and that time was spent, you say, in dance, but then I'm anticipating it was around that time too that you were in Toronto that you were introduced to yoga.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, so that the introduction to yoga was through somehow a backdoor through the Martha Graham stuff, or was it independent of that?
It was backdoor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who was the teacher, and what at that time?
Well,
your first teacher,
the woman who I was studying with. I think she sort of fancied, not in an overt way, but fancied this boy who was part of a Canadian.
Overt?
Well, I mean, one speculates. Tommy Sexton was his name, and his brothers, I think, or he was a part of a Newfoundland group called Codco.
Interesting.
But he was mates with them, and I don't know, he'd been doing yoga apparently, and I for whatever reason, it wasn't entirely clear, the woman I was studying with decided, now we are going to be studying yoga, and Tommy will be teaching us. And, God, Tommy. It's like yoga for hippies, and, what is this? It's just like, but he was a decent chap, and the stuff that we picked up, could see that it had a real value, and it was some style called Iyengar or something like that. I don't know.
I see the cynical tone.
There was, but really, I took things away from it that were, this is interesting, and just went, okay, I can do this on my own. You don't need somebody to teach you this stuff. Yeah. And I think that very much has been the way through it all, is sort of this autodidact approach that you can get very good information from a teacher. You can, you find some stuff that's worth stealing and go and work on it and make it your own. And,
yeah, which I mean, I think is also across creativity. It's not so much about originality. It's just more about the interpretation of what we experience. Filters through and inspires us, and how that gets reinterpreted into something either creative or practical in life. Yeah, I think there can be a lot of emphasis on in the yoga scene too. I guess we'll talk about that, and that's a part of the theme in your books as well too. Where you talk about the sort of I think you referred to it as, I was trying to remember certain references to social world.
Yeah, it was probably something Laurie wrote.
Possibly. I'm sorry, I can't find it right now, but. The industry specifically, and how the industry is how mirroring the industry. I think it was the term as a yoga practitioner, and seeing like what information that brings back to you and your motivations to practice and to teach. If that
Well, I mean, the crazy thing was, the motivation was money. It was. We were, once we made in the early 90s, we made this shift, Trip Sikri, my performing group, we made this shift into yoga theater. And
so when was that shift, by the way?
I think it would be 92. There's a day in September I'll never forget. Except, was it 92 or 90?
Yeah, so if it wasn't 92, it was 93.
Prior to that, what would have Trip Sikri been categorized as?
Well, we called it a performing company. We didn't want to call it dance, and we didn't want to call it theater, because we thought, no, we do performance. And we're more stylized than what...
But now Trip Sikri has become theater.
It's always been theater.
It's always been theater. Okay,
never
so you
called
consider
it dance.
It transformed from that early 90s performance to performance theater, or was it always considered theater?
I mean, Trip Sikri as an entity sort of started. I mean, our first show would have been, I guess, 1977 or 78. It was something we had discussed at university, and we started calling ourselves that way back when, and because we were trippy, and Terp Sikri, everybody asks, yes, Terp Sikri, one of the 9 muses in Greek mythology, of course, the muse of dance. But anyway, we thought we were trippier than terpier, so there, got the Trip Sikri thing out of the way. We had a sort of joke. For ages we'd had this joke, because once we started in our post-Tommy Sexton days, we kept this yoga thing going as part of the way we worked. And we'd had this joke for a long time, because we weren't getting any funding from the arts boards, and just couldn't understand the groups that were actually getting funding. I mean, it made perfect sense in a way, but... we had this joke, that we would do something called yoga theater that would be so dull that we'd be bound to be a big hit with the arts councils. And so I think it may have been in the fall of 92, we had just finished a project, and we were sort of casting around, and we were going to do sort of a pastiche of different dance style. So we were going to have like a Cunningham style piece, and a Jose Limon style piece, and a ballet piece, and to be perfect, we'll do a yoga theater piece. Won't that be merry? So one day we just started, we put 2 sun salutes together, just slightly out of time, with people standing too close together, and went, okay, what does this do? And I mean, the extraordinary thing was that once we started doing, actually even attempting this yoga theater thing of putting the yoga moves together in a way that made them go together, it was so much better than everything that we'd been doing before. And it was just like, oh my God, there's this stuff is rich with choreographic potential that nobody's ever tapped into. And it just seemed to generate this great material. So whilst Martha Graham may have been going on about emotional landscapes, this seemed to give a way to physicalize a spiritual landscape. So because inherently there's themes of balance and harmony and mysticism and ecstasy, they're latent in these pieces and going like, oh wow, this is some great stuff to tap into. So we jettisoned all the things which we wouldn't have done very well anyway, the Cunninghams and the Lamone stuff, and we just started doing, okay, we're going to do a complete yoga theater piece. And
I mean, that permeated right through till now, basically.
Well, yeah, no, it's good. Turned out it was a good thing.
And I would like to discuss the practical aspects of staying alive and in the midst of trying to realize a creative project as such, but also.
Well, that's how the teaching began. Was we were touring this stuff. It actually was like good enough that we were. Nobody else in the physical theater world was doing tours like we were doing, but, we had to rely, we were like a band. We didn't have Arts Council's support, so money was always problematic, but we were getting these gigs and we were getting really good reaction to it, and people would go, oh, well, won't you teach something? And, okay, sure, I'll throw a workshop in here. And ironically, then it got to the point where the teaching was, even though we didn't really want to be doing it, we hadn't set out to teach what we were doing. We were making more money, or we were making enough money doing that it meant the company could survive.
Was it often that the teaching, the workshops that coincided always with the performances?
Absolutely.
I mean, in our experience, whenever I invited you to Japan, I believe. Every time I invited you to Japan, we also organized a performance, and I'll link to those. I have video clips from those performances in the show notes. It was always coincided with the performance, and it was very important. That was one thing that was very important for me, because I coming from a background of music and music performance, when we met, and that was one of the biggest attractions, to have you come to not only teach and share what you were doing as a teacher, which was very unique in my opinion at that point in time, as being not only original but as being invasive in a good way for people for people's practices to be taken a look at more through a critical lens. And at that time, so what I was always excited about was like, fuck, let's put together a performance, like as much as we can do it. But, the practical side of it was that obviously we were able to pay you for some teaching, but we weren't really able to pay you for the performance. I mean,
that's exactly.
So, and
because people, when we were hot,
and we did. I mean, we tried. So just to clarify for the audience, everything we did, we tried to do it as practically as possible. But the reality was, as which many musicians, dancers, performance artists will attribute to, is that performing and making money are two different things.
Yeah, exactly. That was the big motivator for teaching. Was this facilitates my art, and in a sense, it's also audience building, in that you get people who are literate in yoga, then they're going to appreciate this stuff better. And if you get them to be teachers, they're supposed to tell their students, go and see that Trip Sikri group. They're just so there is this sort of building a literacy in the actual field, the discipline.
One thing that also really inspired me when we met was. Again, this critical lens that you looked at yoga through in relation to the backdrop of the industry, because as I said, my introduction to yoga came after yours, but it was still at a time where yoga wasn't yet that popular, and my original teachers were tyrants, and they were not very nice. And at the same time, I really enjoyed my experiences with them. I enjoyed being pushed to my limits. And when we met, I kind of thought, okay, I'm meeting kind of like a hybrid between some of my original teachers and somebody that kind of wants to buffer that experience with the reality of the industry itself by challenging people.
The watershed moment when the yoga voice was born.
There was no yoga voice like that in your workshops, Edward. I mean, not to be critical of it, but I mean, I often say to people too, my experience, my introduction to yoga was far from teachers in Lululemon attire, gently chanting, namaste to the class. I mean, that was. I had, and I'm not critical of that. I understand where that is valuable, and I understand where it will help some people with their motivations to get into yoga, to deal with some stuff that they may be experiencing to try to attain more balance in life, to have somebody that's kind of gentle and forgiving there as somebody to work towards. But my experience was based on the pushing of the limits, my experience of my teachers. And prior to that, because I'd been an athlete, I'd already been experiencing that sort of challenging my limits. And when I met yoga and I met those teachers where we didn't only do the physical practice, but we did other practices alongside of it, like Shat Kriyas and various other breathing and meditation practices too.
Get me my little swallow thing. Oh.
Yeah, exactly. You shove it down your throat, or
between your ears.
Cut the. I mean, there's lots of references that can be made, and when I talk to people about this, that have been exposed to a more modern interpretation of yoga practice and how that's been kind of fused into the health, wellness, and fitness industry. People think, oh, that's kind of weird. Why would you ever want to do that? And it was It was, for one, I wasn't doing it to be popular. In a similar way, it was a visceral experience for me. At that same time, too, I was wanting to get some sort of an understanding or shine more light on some of the ideas that I had about myself, and to try to decipher that through some sort of introspective practice. And martial arts kind of addressed that in some ways, but not as much as yoga did, because my original yoga teachers, lucky for me, as tyrannical as they were also throwing a lot of questions out throughout the experience. Like, yes.
Well, I think what you're alluding to is the nature of intensity, and that has. It informs martial arts, and it informs, obviously, or has in the past informed yoga. That one of the reasons why flexibility is so valorized is because if I really, really get an intense stretch, I feel convinced that I'm having a profound experience and a memory-inducing experience. I mean, it's the nature of intense physicality or intense emotionality is going to have a registering of import, and through that one feels that at the limits there you're discovering something about self, and that I mean it's in the writing that we've been doing lately. It's one of the definitions that we've come up with is that yoga is so when people ask you, what is yoga? It's the study of self and the study of reality and how those two combine. So one of the things...
And a byproduct of that is the transmission of knowledge.
Exactly. Well, that's this communicative thing, this intersection with the
and
big
you don't need to be
other.
A teacher for that, really. You don't need to teach for that experience at the end of the
Well, in fact, better teaching, I think, comes from performance.
Yes.
In many respects, that it's more compelling. People learn something. I mean, I gain a kind of wisdom, I think, from seeing performance rather than pure knowledge. I don't know that we're the only people who've said this, but intelligence, of course, refers to a person's capacity to learn stuff, and knowledge is the stuff that they learn. But the wisdom thing is something more than that. It's the way in which the self applies itself to a transmission of some kind.
So we hear this word, understanding of this. We hear that word self a lot. Can you, from your own perspective, provide the listeners, the viewers, with a definition of self within the context of how we're talking about it right now?
Well, you've got your big ass self. That's those tight Lululemons. Traditionally, I think the idea informing asana in particular has been that there is an irreducible self. This would be your big ass self. Sort of a primal substrata that you, in the course of asana or meditation through asana, you look inwardly and discard all the things that are superfluous to that absolute bottom strata of who you are. And ultimately, I think the idea is that in discovering this foundational self, you would recognize that this self is something that is foundational in all things, so that the way in which this inward-looking sort of version of yoga discovers what is the rock foundation of reality is by looking inwardly. Because we live in an era of vinyasa, it has a different take on what the self is, and it, I think, looks at it as being something that is not irreducible, foundational. Rather, it is something that is more ephemeral, something that changes, and that it regards the nature of self as something that is forever mutable, and that the nature of reality is similar. It is something that is ever evolving, and so the nature of the techniques in vinyasa should be quite different than the ones that are used for asana. In asana, you try and find something that reduces the amount of sensual input that you can take in. But,
so, I mean, for the listeners, I mean, just to sort of unpack this a little bit, add to this, or correct me if I'm wrong, but when we look at the context of asana from the from philosophy, from yoga philosophy, in a modern interpretation of that will be it's the yoga pose, and from the perspective of yoga philosophy, it is it's also some sort of a pose, but it directly translates to comfortable seated position, which is something that's been used over and time again,
stable
position, right? And then vinyasa itself is more about the connecting things would be a way to sort of interpret that, as far as I understood from the meaning within the philosophy, is like in a rudimentary way, is the connection of one, not necessarily only movement, but intention, one intention to another intention. Would you like to add on that? So when people who are watching or listening to this will hear the word vinyasa, they might have heard it at their gym as a type of yoga class that you could attend. And that has found its way into popular yoga through a method called Ashtanga Vinyasa, which was, there's a historical... I would like to say that maybe not. Maybe there's also other entry points from vinyasa into the popular yoga as well. But really, Ashtanga Vinyasa was one, a very prominent one, where people deviated away.
Gateway drug to vinyasa,
where people deviated away from that particular, the structure of that method, to going more freestyle. And I would probably like to say that Tripsikri was in some ways not necessarily an offshoot of Ashtanga, because I don't think there was any association for that with you guys, but in relation to the type of practice, so for one, can you define vinyasa? Was that a good enough definition from the philosophical perspective, or can you add to that? And now can we give people an understanding of what vinyasa is from the contemporary perspective?
I think it's understanding that the reason why one does fluid movement, such as you do in vinyasa, is that it seems to be coming from a presumption that the nature of time, the nature of reality and time, is that it is a fluid thing. There is no point in time. There is no stoppage. It is no foundational thing. Rather, it's a process. And so, like Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, was known for, you can't step into the same river twice, for waters flow and flow. This is the nature of reality. It is something that is a flowing thing. So vinyasa attempts to understand the self in this flowing process by bringing the body into a state of fluid movement, that there is, in fact, no asana if you're going to take the polar position of vinyasa, it's that there is only movement and it is continuous, and that the flow of information that one receives from reality, positing for a moment that there is self and everything that's not self, that they are both things that are moving in a fluid way. So it tries, in the same way that asana tries to plumb inwardly to discover this foundational state, vinyasa assumes that rather it is something that's always fluid, always moving, and so brings oneself into some accord with that fluidity by doing procedures with the body that are constant in their movement and constant in the way in which they appreciate reality.
And that's what it's always meant to you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so what is it now? What is it now? How is vinyasa seen in contemporary yoga? How the person that hears about a vinyasa class at a fitness club?
Oh, you're going to do 50 Virabhadrasanas in it. We'll change from this Virabhadrasana to that one, and maybe we'll do an Ardha Chandrasana in it, and then we'll do some other stuff. We'll put together some dumb sequences, and it'll be kind of entertaining, and we'll put some music on.
And it'll be
Sounds cool.
Invigorating most of the time, right?
Oh, God,
yes.
Yeah. But yes, I think here's changing the subject slightly, but it is allied. You have both in asana and vinyasa a bevy of people who have a fabulous skill level. I mean, and whilst you earlier were decrying the sort of reduction of yoga to this, it's about health and fitness and stress relief and maybe a little bit of trauma bonding. And it can be all those things, yes. and rightly so. But there are other ways to get stress relief.
It to those things.
It's been, there's other ways, probably more effective ways to be fit.
Exactly. Yeah.
And probably you should be going to a therapist if you need to do a little bit of trauma bonding, or, but if you can use it to do these things. But what you have, the actual physical skills that one acquires doing advanced vinyasa or asana have almost no function in the real world. You will never need to do a standing back bend where you reach around and grab your ankles. It doesn't come up. It's never going to happen. And this is the real tragedy about what people do with the skills that they practice, is they have no real application for them. So they make up, it's good for you, it's the things like that. And this is just bringing it back to the theater thing. We're using these skills because they are brilliant for conveying the kind of information that we want to convey. And right now, if you had people who wrote plays, but there was no such thing as theater, there was no way you could put on plays, or you had people who studied ballet and learned to do extraordinary ballet things, but there was no such thing as performances of ballet. That's kind of where we're at in the yoga world. You have people with this remarkable skill level who are not really sure what it's for. Mm-hmm. So they make up things that are not untrue, but it means that they're missing out on what have been the higher level, there's a real hierarchy here. They're missing out on the transcendent stuff, the ecstasy stuff, the stuff where the intensity is what's really important. Or the way in which they've interpreted intensity is seeing it as like hit yourself on the head with a hammer kind of a few times, because you've got to do 50 chaturangas to feel intense, or I've got to do splits my feet up on blocks so that I can actually get even further than 180 degrees. And whereas intensity, certainly in a flow sort of state, is something that can happen through maybe the subtlety with which you intensely keep going. How smooth, how intensely smooth can you make things? And so these skills aren't even being considered for the most part in a gym situation. You know, they're just things where you bounce around and have a good time.
I mean, everything's become very sensational, irrespective of it. And I think yoga has found it, you know.
I'm all for a good time.
You're all for sense, yeah. But I mean, the sensational aspect of it, like you say, is something that can take people away from the subtleties of that, as you just explained. The subtlety of intensity would be perseverance. You know, like it doesn't have to be, you don't have to have the sledgehammer. If you persevere for 10 years, that's intense. And I think that's a very good analogy. And like you say, and what, you know, another thing I'd like to, you know, assume is that a lot of the people that we see out there on social media that are doing amazing physical performances of yoga.
Take the picture quickly.
Where do they come from? You know, what's their background? Have they been athletes? Have they been ballerinas? Have they been gymnasts? You know, so and I think what we see a lot of contortionists. What we see a lot of is people that also may have
a skill set that was derived in other places. Yeah.
Exactly. It came already. It wasn't something.
This is why a 22-year-old who looks good in her outfit can be seen as, oh my God, I'll go and study with them. They may not know very much, but until 16 they were a gymnast and they wear a fetching outfit, and people go to this with the assumption, well, if I go to them, I will look like them.
That person becomes the authority, like you say, and then without the depth of the understanding of what the perseverance has produced in terms of like a long-term commitment to a practice. And also something I wanted to talk to you about is like injuries, one thing that can come out of it, and injury and or physical condition, physical body change, as you said. The self, the self, not only the self and the experience of self within the context of the world is immutable, but the body's always changing. I mean, and that information or the informed understanding of a deep yoga practice, for me anyways, it was totally driven by injuries and physical conditions that came up. And I know that we both share osteoarthritis and torn labrums. And the torn labrum, I remember for years you were limping around, coming to Tokyo, limping into, and me too, I was limping because for years, terrible.
Those two, what a pair of limpers.
Yeah, what are limpers?
Limp artists.
These are the yoga teachers, by the way. You know, but I mean, it's interesting too, because we don't really limp that badly anymore all the time. It's like there is a kind of, there's a process and a cycle to everything, and my experience has been always like, okay, has that physical experience that I had been totally in relation to what I'm doing physically, or has there been some sort of external thing where this helps me to point back towards the deeper aspect of my experience of the human experience itself? Has that informed somehow the physical outcome of my experience? Through this manifesting through like a torn labrum in my hip, or like calcifications or osteophytes growing around my pelvis, you know, like it's, what is it? Yeah.
Sucks, it's what it is.
Yes, it does. I mean, because what I was trying to get to there, and I didn't want to deviate too much from the main thing, is this, like there are lots of people that are adept physically, young, good, healthy bodies.
Let's see them when they're 70.
Exactly, and what and they become the authority. And I'm not saying that from the perspective of like, oh, they shouldn't be the authority. It's like, of course, if they can perform stuff and it looks great and people put their trust into them to learn something, I think that's good for other people that go to learn with them. But my experience, and I'm anticipating that in part your experience has also been the same, is understanding the edge in which you play. You're balancing on to realize some of the deeper perceptual outcomes that come from a physical practice, a commitment, and or, as you're doing with Tripsikri, the performance-based aspect of that and the interaction with the people that are watching you, you know. So, and I'm going deep here because I'm taking a chance. I believe we
Well,
can.
I think the thing is,
So if you've resonated so far with any of the topics discussed, please consider sharing it with others and clicking the like button. This is really going to help more people find it and support all the efforts that go into this production. Your being here to check out this episode today is a massive contribution toward the sharing of ideas that unfold in these talks, and thank you very much for your support. And subscribe to get real-time notifications about all upcoming episodes.
yoga, for me, is a profoundly sensual experience. And the pain of injury can be part of that. That I think I'd prefer it not to be.
Yes.
But it's not. I think the way in which we appreciate reality, how I see it anyway, is that it is a profound aesthetic experience, that it's as though there is beauty latent in all things, and we have technologies like art or yoga give us a way to apprehend this. So as you get older, you don't want to have sort of a world that just narrows down to the sort of toboggan run of things that you've always done. You use your senses in a way that allows you to apprehend new information, hopefully intense information, so that it is deeply significant and meaningful and memory forming, just by the way in which you get better at sensing. And that is the way in which we connect with things that are other. I mean, if only the at-home listeners and viewers could see what Patrick and I are doing with our eyes right now. Somehow or other, there's a very intense thing, because we're like making eye contact, like I am with you right now, that there's a moment where we click together and you go, oh my God, the other thing is actually there. And we know when it's clicked in and when it's not clicked in. I mean, we're just receiving electrochemical symbols of one kind or another, we get it. The information is coming in through our eyes, so light waves are going in there, and it gets passed to a part of the brain where we happen to assemble an image of Patrick or an image of Edward over there. And it's not the real thing, it's a simulacrum that we're making up. As long as we recognize it's not, I don't have a Patrick in here, but the thing that I've created has a certain beauty to it. And this is getting skilled at yoga means that with your body, you get increasingly skilled at apprehending information.
It's very interesting, yeah.
And so beauty is just this thing that is latent in all things. And the reason for doing the performances is through yoga choreography, we can entice people into this same kind of connection. They appear as an audience and are ready to receive this kind of information and to go, oh my God, the thing that those people on stage are experiencing is, I'm feeling it too. Just as in any theater performance, if the actor is playing a sad scene, the people in the audience, they're experiencing a sadness. They're not experiencing the same sadness that he's experiencing, but there is this fundamental exchange that goes on. And, so if people are doing a great high arch, and the sort of joy that you experience when you take your body to a place like that, it's something that can be conveyed to an audience, just as in our making eye contact here, we're conveying something about the thrill of what it is to be with another person and talking about these things and going, my God, that's living. That doesn't get changed with injury and old age. Hopefully you just get smarter about going deeper into it so that...
Well, I mean, injury could also be a great metaphor for any kind of challenge that comes up in life, anything, any kind of roadblock to the process whereby we can just think of it like, fuck, this sucks, or we can go through that process of the block, whatever it is that happens, and come out on the other end more informed from the experience. And I've always, attributed my physical experiences, including yoga, to metaphorically align with the psychological difficulties that we sort of the psychological, experiential, personal difficulties that I've had in my life, and I mean many.
I'm laughing. It's terrible. I'm laughing. He's talking about the terrible things that have happened in his life, and I'm laughing at it. He's come through the other side. Everybody, he is whole again.
Well, I mean, but I understand where the laughter comes from, and I mean, I think that and a lot of these experiences need to be really just looked at as a kind of theater in themselves.
It's the theater of life.
And it's and what you talked about in relation to performance and what you do. I mean, this is one thing that enticed me so much about my experience with yoga is prior to yoga, I was playing punk rock music. And this was end of the 70s into the 80s. So, and we played gigs and I went to gigs. And those experiences were very visceral. So from the performance perspective too, right through until I stopped playing music in the 2000s, something that aligned with my experiences in yoga and in martial arts and athletics was that the performance-based aspect of it, interaction with the audience, was something that was very profound for me. How I felt this electrochemical, if you want to call that connection, with the participants or viewers of the audience, which is inevitably extended on to teaching as well too. In the experience of teaching as well, it's not so much about performing for me as it may be for some people, but I do have the experience of the interactions in learning with others, where I also learn a lot about myself through those interactions, where I improve how I approach working with different people with different perceptual qualities of that experience. That punk rock performance experience fuel injected my experience with yoga. And it wasn't because I started doing yoga and I started performing. Back when we started, there was no Instagram. I mean, there was nothing. So I would even have to say that Tripsikri and everything that you were doing was all over magazines. And at that point, it was wow, look at, it was between what you were presenting photographically in those experiences and how people were talking about the theater that you were doing, aligned with the more sort of discipline-based images that you would get from BKS Iyengar or Sri Patabi Joyce and, yeah, exactly. But I mean, those were all...
Everything is beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, the light on yoga, I mean, all of those, but those were all, I mean, again, looking at those, trying to understand what that actually would mean to one person on an individual level, and actually doing it in some contextually through some experience that I had viscerally on stage from playing punk rock. And I mean, if people are a little bit confused about what I'm talking about, it's when there was two parts to playing music. One was rehearsing and being able to be confident that we could go on stage and actually rehearse and play those songs in the way that were actually put together and written. The other one was to actually try and let go of the linear process of learning and become non-linear in the performance aspect of it, where the juice really starts to pump out, right? So from that, we forget about technique and we just...
Now we play.
And then through that sort of visceral explosion, at that point, there's some sort of a connection to this ethereal connection to what maybe, but at least for me anyway, how I've interpreted it, to the connection of the self is deep down root underbelly, bottom, root connection with the essence of what you may represent.
Again, it's just what I'm saying earlier, that, you rehearse so that you can do the thing. But yoga doesn't have any performance. They have eliminated the major initiatory sorts of things where the initiation of we've practiced, okay guys, now we're going to go play. It's Monday night and it's open mic night, but we're still going to play.
Would you understand what I meant by from the coming to the experience
absolutely.
of punk rock, and then I went to yoga, and because there was no performance related in yoga, what this yoga experience did for me is it helped me to understand the blah part of the punk rock experience through the visceral practice of yoga and through in the more subtle practice of yoga. Which is kind of the other way around. Like, I didn't perform the yoga thereafter. It was more like the yoga was somehow helping me to understand those powerful experiences.
The argument would be that what you're doing, that is the performance. What you were doing in the yoga class is examining where there is and an interesting balance perhaps between the two. Personally, just on top of all this, I prefer rehearsing to performing if I had to. I mean, I like performing; it's good, but I like the making up of stuff, and that to me is when the really intense moments of creativity happen, or a moment of real elucidation occurs, because you go, oh my God, no, this is how we make this make sense. There's a kind of intellectual excitement that doesn't so much happen in performance, but that might be because I'm often producing at the same time, and I'm sort of there in a headstand counting ticket sales. But yeah, so I mean, there are not many occasions where your yoga gets tested. And the thing about the punk rock is you have to go out there, and when you do that, the test is, am I really going to be up there and doing it? Will I actually? Because you can't stop in the middle and go, sorry, wait, hey, guys, where is A again? You have to do it. And I mean, in the past, I suppose where yogis had to go up on a freezing cold night to 18,000 feet in the Himalayas and dry off a soaking wet cotton sheet thrice, 3 times it must be done. Those kind of tests don't exist in the yoga world unless the teacher is in some way going, okay, I think
come on, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, but yeah, and something I also forgot to mention is that what permeated through the experience of punk rock was also my prior experience as an athlete to that. So when I was younger, I was competitive swimming and competitive cycling. Competitive cycling specifically is arduous, and right now, in the past couple of years, I've been getting back into watching it, at least Tour de France, because what's happening right now at the level of these younger athletes that are really pushing the limits. Everybody's pushing the limits right now in terms of athletics, but it also reminded me of that, like the training, like you say, the training was actually in many ways better than the actual race itself. But in either the race and or the training, there was also this a transference from technique and training specific targeted goals to letting go of whatever the expectation would be of the outcome, and being really faced with a very challenging physical situation, which you would have to navigate somehow. And that, again, it went from my experience as an athlete to the punk rock, and then to my experience with yoga, or intermittently with martial arts and yoga as well, more yoga. And how I could correlate all those things again with the difficult experiences I was having in my life. And difficult experiences meaning it could be transpersonal, it could be physical, like having an injury and thinking like, oh wow, this injury is just stopping what I normally do, and that finding a creative way to live with that injury.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, some injuries, I mean, maybe we've been lucky.
Yes.
Maybe unlucky, but also lucky. I mean, it wasn't like we lost a limb or anything like that.
In which case, you see, there's lots of stories where you see people that have lost a limb or have something more serious happen to them, and they pull themselves right back out of it. I met a guy here in Quebec. I bought a car from him, and he was working for Quebec Hydro, and he was up on a telephone pole fixing something, and he was electrocuted, 50,000 volts, and it blew his arm off. Oh my God. And they had to take parts of his muscles from his leg and put it to his arm, and he's been, handicapped, but didn't stop him. He does everything. I mean, without the full use of one arm, and somehow the leg rejuvenated. And just hearing stories like that really inspire me because people do find a way to get through adverse situations in a way which is meaningful and has some outcome. And I talked with him and his wife at length at that time. I went in and had a sparkling water with them in their house, and
Oh, you devil!
Yes, that detail is very important. But we talked about that. He was in a coma for a long time, and his wife was just wondering if she would ever be able to communicate. And he came out and turned it around totally. I'm inspired by that type of stuff. I mean, obviously, those adverse situations, we can do without them. I mean, it's not like, and this is where I, even though I say to a lot of people that I had a very visceral and kind of like weird experience with some of my yoga teachers in the past who were very kind of hard and wanted the outcome of their relationship to be
one more time.
Exactly. Relentlessly, like going through it, and if you were experiencing anything difficult, they weren't, oh, it's okay, take it easy. It was like, get the fuck up and do it. And those experiences for me were very transformative. But like I was saying, is that it's not, if somebody wants to get fit, I think as you said, there are easier, less invasive ways to get fit, or find some sort of a path to community or happiness or something like that. If somebody really wants to dig into a deep yoga practice, how it would be potentially presented to one 1,000 years ago or something, to whatever historical timeline there would be. I'm not sure what the experience would be for somebody. I mean, as you said in the beginning, if people are using yoga and anything else that sort of falls into the health, wellness, fitness, self-help category to get altitude on how to be a little bit happier or healthier or smarter, I think it's a really great thing that somehow that wasn't my experience, and although I've come out more informed of the entire thing, and I still have a kind of a yoga practice, my own yoga practice alongside of the other practices that I do, that binds me to the importance of that experience for me in my life. I see it more like now just as a kind of a pathway for me to sort of adhere to in some ways, to as a referential point to bounce other stuff, contextualize other stuff. Which in some ways I'd like to because we're kind of we need to move on to what's also important here is the books that you've published with Laurie.
Yes, a small commercial message.
Yeah, a small. I mean, and so there are two books here, and I'm just going to be holding them up here. The one on my left is the first book. The one on my right here is the newer book, and these are co-authored by Edward's co-writing partner, Laurie Green. She's sitting here right next to us. But I would like to know, for example,
itching for me to introduce the books. Edward.
Yes, we're going to introduce the books in a second and properly, but. I would love to continue on these other topics. It's just because there's so much we can talk about. I need to get some of this in for the viewers. For one, how long have you known Laurie? It's important that we draw some sort of correlation because she's your co-author, she's your collaboration partner on these things. How long have you known Laurie?
I must be 20 years.
20 years, okay. So about as long as we've known each other, but at the same time.
Similar era.
And what inspired you and Laurie to endeavor?
To make, the mega bucks that come when you publish a yoga book.
By the way, it was $140, that book, right?
Yeah, but there's a paperback one for and if you use the ADC25 author's discount code, you can get the paperback for probably under $30 or quid.
So, I mean, starting with
the
teaching contemporary yoga, physical philosophy, and critical issues. What inspired you and Laurie first and foremost to get together to collaborate?
Well,
to write
it
that
wasn't
book?
for the money. That's true. It was an act of. We had been doing a number of teacher training things, and Laurie used to have as many as 4 studios in the U.S.
Okay.
Yoga 9, and
in
we had
where?
written.
Where was that?
In New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
In Jersey. In Ventnor City, as it happens, but at the time, Smithville, which is very close to Pleasantville, which makes you wonder about the naming of things in New Jersey. We had been doing teacher trainings, and we had written up a lot of notes about things, and it was all very teacher training sort of relevant. And we used none of that in the books. We jettisoned it all. But remarkably, I mean, we wanted, Laurie is a professor of anthropology, and one of the things that we just found terribly curious was that the academic world has very much ignored the actual phenomenon of what goes on in yoga. There is a lot of academic writing about ancient literature, ancient texts, and some of it very good. And there is some writing about the phenomenon of the yoga industry and the business and sort of a social aspect of it. But very little writing of an academic nature is what actually goes on when you teach yoga and the actual practice of yoga. So we wrote this first book about teaching yoga, and it's, you know, kind of a bit academic. It's a trade book as well, but it is, you know, it's like this is how an anthropologist might approach the subject of teaching yoga. And it just seemed that there's so many yoga teacher training courses. It's remarkable that it hasn't been studied in this kind of depth. The second book, which is about practice, which is, yes, well, take your finger off of the head. Look, what a remarkable, how does he do that? Yes, very difficult. Don't try it at home, kids. But it actually is what it looks like. It's about the body. It's about the actual practice. And this was, in many ways, a more interesting book to write because we both have, you know, substantial practices and, you know, been doing it for 50 years, each of us. So there's a lot that we've learned about. And
so, I mean, listen, I mean, there's, you know, in my understanding of both books, there's a lot of, it's looking at both teaching and practice through a very critical lens. And when one would think, okay, you know, like, from a contemporary, or from a modern, like modern yoga perspective, I don't mean modern within the context of philosophy, but modern perspective on your teacher training out there at your local yoga studio or your local fitness club. This is not exploring, for example, how one would find the best teacher training necessarily. So can you?
It's about actual teaching.
Teaching. Okay, so can you give us some like teaching within the context of the industry, or teaching to try and disseminate some of these ideas that we touched on today in relation to understanding self-motivation?
It's analyzing various parts of it. For one thing, it considers exactly what the philosophies are in asana and vinyasa and contrasts those. And it discusses ritual, the actual ritual nature in terms of how ritual has been perceived anthropologically, and it explains why the yoga class is a ritual, and these are the functions of ritual, and this is how you make a good ritual, and these are the hallmarks of what ritual does. Talks about the actual sort of development of the critical faculties that a teacher needs, and contrasts those with the things that you do as a practitioner, and explains basic sort of things like the use of language, and where we have
syntax,
well, things like floating signifiers. We talk about the practice. And, you know, everybody knows what the practice means, but nobody really knows what the practice is. Or, have you done the work? If you don't put in the work, the practice, not your practice, the practice will never reveal itself to you.
Okay.
You know, so it's, you know, how people use language, and, you know, looking at things like the way Sanskrit is used in the contemporary scene, just as. And certainly it's not about, these are postures and what you do. Here's another sequence
Talks about issues though like adjustments and what are these are the kinds of adjustments you do, and this is why you'll get in trouble if you touch somebody inappropriately, or there's that kind of stuff is covered. But what constitutes appropriate and what constitutes inappropriate, and defining those as they're defined in the contemporary scene. And so nothing gets older faster than the contemporary.
And you're not. I mean, this. So again, one wouldn't look at this like, okay, so how much are you going to be talking about Patanjali Yoga Sutra in relation to the...
Funnily enough, only to diss it. But
what I mean by that is like, so what is often presented as the one and only...
The classical yoga.
The classical yoga is the only thing any modern teacher training often talks about is Patanjali Yoga Shastra.
Let's start with the yamas and niyamas.
Patanjali Yoga Sutras.
Yeah, so... I mean, yes, we take issue with that, whilst also giving due respect for what the Yoga Sutras is. But yeah, I mean, it is hilarious that has become the Yoga Sutras. You have to sort of, Patanjali. You have to do it with a little sigh and a yoga voice, and it is something I think every yoga teacher should at least be familiar with. But it's the idea that this represents classical yoga is a historical accident of our time.
Mm-hmm. Only really made popular through Bhikkya Iyengar and Pattabhi Jois. I mean, not only, but largely made popular through those two teachers specifically.
I mean, Mark Singleton in his book traces it back to Vivekananda's presentation at the religious conferences in whatever it was, 1893 at the
And that's
Chicago.
another good point. Is that there's a group of academics, Mark Singleton being one of them, Jason Birch, James Mallinson.
Yeah,
they're all doing
the Oxford Trio.
The Oxford Trio. There's even a few more. They're trying to unpack various different through the study of Sanskrit texts and scriptures, a more interpretive look at the cross-section of philosophy. It could be kind of a very easy way. I did bring Jason's new book here today, just as a kind of a reference. This is the newest book, I believe. We just received a copy of that, right? It was, right? This is the one we received a copy of recently. Jason and James and Mark Singleton have been collaborating for years to discuss these topics. Mark Singleton's very controversial book, which...
Only in a very small, a vocal selection of people who are... It's not very controversial. I mean, he writes well and he writes sensibly.
We see it that way, and there's a lot of people that weren't very happy about that book. And we'll link to all those books.
I hope there's lots of people are unhappy with what Laurie and I've written.
Well, yes. So
because a lot of it is a little bit like it's a bit challenging. I think it says like, "Come on, guys."
So this is why this is another reason why I wanted to make sure that we had this talk, because it certainly is critical, and both books. I mean, from the excerpt that you sent me from the new book and from Teaching Contemporary Yoga, there's a lot of critical analysis there, and I think it's of great value to anybody that wants to have, particularly if somebody's out there teaching or practicing.
If you're listening to Transmission, you want to buy these books.
Yes,
or steal them.
We openly endorse them, and as I do endorse the work of our academic friends in the UK and in Europe. But the endorsement is not only from the perspective of, oh, it's a great book, you got to read it, but it's more just like taking stuff apart that can be more critically examined to understand motivations and outcomes, and I believe that's really important for contemporary yoga.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the concepts in the teaching book is how important critical acceptance is, that you take a hypothesis and you go with it wholly, and then you critically evaluate it. And don't just go with a hypothesis, or don't go with something that somebody said Patanjali is the only one, that's the classical. Don't just take what somebody said, but the things that you do take, accept them, and then critically evaluate them and change what needs to be changed. It's not just accept blindly. It's accept and be critical.
Yeah, and I'm hoping people can take that message to heart, because I believe that also permeates across just about anything anyone does in life. I mean, there's information that can be attained from any source, and can we take a look at that and actually make some sense out of it and actually go deeper into where
evolve
that
it,
is?
because
evolve it, yeah.
anything that is absolutely set in stone it's already dead. It's a museum piece. Something like a discipline like yoga should be growing. It shouldn't be like, oh, they got it right 2,000 years ago and we've lost that knowledge. We'll never find it again because we live in the Kali Yuga. And, it's like, no, let's entertain what their hypothesis was. Entertain it as a hypothesis, go with it wholly, and then evaluate what comes up. And, that's how things grow. That's how you evolve.
Which I think is a very good point, because the perception not only of yoga but of martial arts is that it is very exclusively related to the history, contextually.
Yeah.
And as you said right now, that these things are evolving, perceptually, contextually. What is it that we do these things for? How does it influence us? How is that extending out into the world that we live in an experiential way, and in the way that we communicate with other people? How can that be reinterpreted and regurgitated back into some sort of new interpretation of something that could be meaningful or useful?
I think. This is something we were talking with Adam Keane about the other day as well. Is that one of the fascinating things, and this is going to be a great closing line. One of the fascinating things is that things like transmission, podcasts like this. This is where there is the real talk and the discussion of ideas is going on in these kinds of forums, where the people who are at the top of their field get together and go, let's bat some ideas around. And we're doing it under the pressure of, okay, this is being recorded. People are going to actually listen to this or watch this at some point.
And scrutinize it.
And hopefully, critically evaluate it and go, oh, well, they talked rubbish for 9/10 of that. But this is the forum of the podcast is actually a very interesting sort of, there's discussion going on in yoga that is going to further things, and it is one of the main engines right now for where yoga is going.
And there's a lot of great media out there right currently, but so I'm surprised you say you haven't done too many podcasts like this.
Yeah, I don't like how I come across. Smug swine.
Yeah, smug swine is all good though. I mean, that's something that I've always loved about you. And as we start to sort of get toward the end of this particular conversation, which, as I told you before, I'm hoping we can continue the conversation into the future, because things change just like anything. In our next conversation, we're probably informed by new stuff that happens. But currently, now with the release of these 2 books, you're continuing to produce, choreograph, and perform. Yeah. What's going on? Like, what's happening now? Like, realistically for people, it's like at the timing at which these podcasts gets released is always a little bit speculative, because we've got so much other stuff going on. So we make the recordings, but currently we are 2025 May 30th. And what's kind of evolving around this time frame for you, you and Laurie both?
Well, for me, my big deal is I've got Tripsikari groups sort of round the world, and I'm at the end of June, so next month, bringing 2 groups from Malaysia and some live musicians and performers from Mexico, and we're meeting up in Spain, and we're doing a show with the Spanish Tripsikari group there, and so doing 3 nights and doing a little tour in Spain with the gang, and they've never met each other, so everybody knows each other sort of from Instagram or Facebook or whatever, and lots of admiration shared amongst them. But now I'm going to put them all into the same room on the same stage, doing stuff that we've been sort of working on very similar pieces, sometimes the same piece, in Malaysia and in Mexico. So I can do a bit of combination of them, and it should be very interesting, and I hope to live through it.
Are you, I mean, is it the goal in the future to try and bring people together like this more periodically on a regular basis?
We'll evaluate
You'll
it.
Evaluate that when it happens.
It's kind of a bit of a nightmare. Just logistics
Yeah.
of it are huge, and the
but
costs.
the logistics are part of the process is a great thing.
Yeah. There's a theater of presentation, which is, I don't know. I'm not really sure. We will evaluate. Okay, what have we accomplished with this? Did it work? And but it is the critical acceptance thing again. Right now, we're just going. Here we go with the best show we can possibly do, and we're accepting. We're doing this show, and then we'll critically evaluate it and go, yeah, we can make this better. We can do these things, or that was a bad hypothesis. Totally didn't work.
Do people still come to see you in England?
I haven't performed in England since.
Not performance. Also, you did have some sort of training programs going on in England.
Yeah, I'm not doing those anymore.
Are you doing?
But if people, I do class once or twice a day, and so if people are around, they can write and say, "Are you doing class today?" And
at your place?
Yeah,
yeah.
And then, let them come and do it if they fancy it.
What about teacher trainings? Do these books depict the end of that for you, or are you?
I think so. Yeah, no, I just don't think I can stomach another one.
Yeah.
But if the right offer came along, I'm not in a hurry to. I don't really want to be teaching much anymore. I want to put my waning efforts into the art side of things.
Yeah, but that's fantastic. And for you and Laurie, in relation to the publishing of these books, is there anything related to the books that you will be doing, like tours of presentations, or
there will be, but
I think would be useful for people.
Folks, watch out for. We have a publicity agent, so they're going to be doing wonderful things, I believe, and should be interesting. I don't know whether Oprah is too small for us to do these days.
Well, but I think that it would be great to have both of you regularly do speaking presentations on the topics of these books. I think it's very important for the industry to have this pushback.
What was great about going to Tokyo with you and Satoko was that you were one of the few places that went, no, we want you to do the philosophy stuff.
Yeah. Well, I wanted you to always. I always wanted you to not only to perform, not only to teach, but also to sit in front of a group that would be interested, to share your interpretation of some of the things that we just talked about tonight. We did that every visit that you came, and there was always enough people that came to make it worth a while. So.
Extraordinary. But yeah, it was. There was a real feeling. I may have changed a little bit, but certainly 20 years ago, if you wanted to make sure you only got 2 people to come to a workshop, you would say pranayama somewhere in pranayama for beginners, and nobody would show up because it was like, even if you were teaching like the best breathing ever. And now it kind of was the same with philosophy. It was like, oh God, but yeah, people would always show up.
Yeah, and this, I feel like it could be the next. They were always, and by the way, I'm going to somehow eventually get. I'll export. I recorded all of them. You know that, right?
Really?
All of those ones, and I'll export them some and send them to you somehow on Google Drive. Remember, I was always connecting you with microphones. I documented pretty much everything we did in Tokyo, like with our friends too, Emil Wendell and Jason Birch, even Mark Singleton when he came, he did some stuff with us at the studio, and I documented most of that stuff. It's just all sitting on hard drives and old VHS tapes somewhere where I need to sort of get the time to sort of pull it all out. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it is the sort of vibe. I mean, luckily not collecting too much dust, but I did document those things for a reason. I thought it would be valuable to somehow reflect.
These will become the texts by which our era is remembered.
But I'm going to dig those out and I'll find them and I'll send them over to you. But look, I think we covered quite a bit in a condensed way, and I'd probably like to wrap it up at this point in time. I will be including in the show notes where people can connect with both you and Lori, and information about where they can find out about all the performance related stuff you're going to be doing from this point forward. But again, it's been quite a while since we've seen each other, and I'm really happy that you agreed to do this. We just talked about doing it remotely, and then you said, "Oh, I'll be in Montreal." So I said, "Well,
like the first time since 1978."
It's not that old.
Good timing.
But I'm happy we had a chance to do it here in this beautiful space. And by the way, this the space that we're in is called Circuit Est, and they have two buildings, and it's for both. Rehearsals for performance artists and dancers, and they also have a performance space, and it's set up by a group of interesting people in Montreal. It's very democratically supported to make it accessible to everybody, and one of the reasons we like using this space is just because of the ethos behind it, and I thought it would be a fantastic vibe for us to do it here, and I asked for their permission to see if it would be okay that we do this here today, and they granted it, which I'm very happy about, and thank you very much to Circuit Est for that. I think we'll finish on that note for today. But again, look, Edward, I really appreciate you taking the time to come.
It's been such a real pleasure. Absolutely great.
And we will, and I'm sure we will pick up this conversation again in the future. There's more stuff I'd like to dig into that we weren't able to get into, but we'll do that at another point down the future. But thank you.
Thank you.
And until next time.
Bye.
If anything that you heard today resonated with you, please consider liking it or sharing it or subscribing to our channel, or even leaving us a 5-star review. Your contribution helps us to reach more people with the content that we are sharing. If you have any ideas or comments that you would like to share with us, please send them to ideas@baseworks.com. To benefit from exclusive content delivered right into your inbox, consider signing up for our newsletter from the footer on any page on our website. And to know more about Baseworks specifically and everything that we're doing, visit our website at baseworks.com.